English 102, back with another video covering our discussion of Rogerian argument, which is the genre for Essay 2. What Rogerian argument does, as we talked about in class, is it argues for a compromise in particular. So without further ado, let's get started. Remember this is our map of the class. We pulled it up on our very first video, and I believe it was discussed on either the first or the second day of class. So in the middle is academic argument, which is the focus of English 102. When you finish English 102, you're supposed to have a good idea of what academic argument is and what it requires. The four things extending out from it are the four branches of academic argument that we're going to be covering in this class. Remember, our first one was journalism when we did the op-ed. Our second one is compromise-based or Rogerian, which is what this video talks about. The third one is interpretive, and the final one is research-based. So we're still on the left side of our map here. So we're moving from journalism to compromise-based for Essay 2. So the question we need to be asking ourselves throughout this video is, what do we take with us from Essay 1, and what might be we leaving behind? So let's dive into Rogerian argument. Let's figure out exactly what it is. Let's start with our purpose, why and how we're going to go about this. Our purpose here is to propose a compromise, compromise being the key term or focal term of Rogerian argument. Moving down, the subjects that we'll be choosing from are issues in educational curriculum. And when I say educational curriculum, I mean issues in the subjects or the material that's taught in an educational setting, not things like tuition or other college business like that. You'll also be allowed to discuss educational curriculum outside of college, such as high school, middle school, elementary school, or other levels. Your audience, who we're doing this for, are differing sides. So remember, whatever issue you choose, it needs to be controversial, meaning people need to have strong opinions on either side. Your goal, once again, is to propose a compromise, bridging those sides together, trying to get them to reach a common ground. So, how do we go about doing this compromise? I've developed a four-step process that matches up with our process for idea developing. If you remember, it's name it, explain it, prove it, and conclude it. Let's start with the first bubble on the left, number 1. We want to establish a question to explore first. Why should there be a compromise for this issue? Why is it important? You might take a look at the issue and see, oh, what are the stakes for this issue? What could possibly happen if there is no compromise? Who could a compromise benefit? So after we have that established, we essentially have our perspective on the issue established. We've named it, as we've done in part 1. In part 2, we want to explore both sides of the issue. We want to specifically ask, what is the rationale behind both sides? Now, I know that no matter what issue you pick, you're going to take one side or another. It's only natural. So what we have to do here is we have to make sure that we fully consider both sides. Remember, we don't want to be judgmental, but we want to be more understanding of what their ideas are, what are their shared assumptions and beliefs behind these sides. Through exploring that, you'll gain a greater understanding of why both sides believe what they believe. Number 2 equates to explaining it. By exploring both sides, you're really explaining and fleshing out the entirety of the issue instead of just focusing on your opinion. Bubble 3, establish a common ground between both sides. Answering the question, what are some of the values shared by both sides? This is going to be the goal of the body of your essay. Through exploring both sides, you want to find similar ideas, things like shared beliefs and assumptions. Now, they might not agree on everything, obviously, but there is something that both sides both want that's similar. A value, a belief, particularly when it comes to educational curriculum, both sides are definitely interested in providing the best educational curriculum possible. So that would be a good place to maybe start establishing your common ground. This Bubble 3 here is when you go about proving it. You prove that, yes, a compromise can happen because you present a common ground. And last, and this is conclusion material, we propose our compromise. You should be more focused on how this could benefit both sides here. You've answered the question in the beginning why there should be a compromise. Start talking about the how here in the end. Here in Bubble 4, when you propose your compromise, you're going to be concluding it. Now, unlike Essay 1, you're going to be building up to this compromise. So your conclusion becomes increasingly more important for the Rogerian argument. So now we want to kind of think back to what we were saying at the map and say, okay, what are we going to be taking from Essay 1? What's going to be new from Essay 2? And what are we possibly going to leave behind? In particular, we're going to be focusing on arguing to compromise as opposed to arguing to support your own opinion or belief. Now in Essay 1, as I just said, we took some outside evidence and analyzed it to argue the validity of one perspective, which was our opinion. Whereas in SA2, we're analyzing to make a connection between the shared ideas of two perspectives. So we're not looking to see whether something is legitimate or not, or whether it's a sound belief, but you're looking for that connection between the two sides. So that's where direction your analysis needs to go for the Rogerian argument. Both of these obviously will be analyzing to support your argument. However, in SA2, your argument is going to be for a compromise as opposed to one particular side. In specific, there are a lot more things we're going to take from SA1 to SA2 and some others that we're going to leave behind. Obviously, our purpose stays the same. We are going to be arguing. Again, the goal of English 102 is for you guys to learn academic argument. You're also going to have an understanding of the context surrounding your issue as a means of establishing credibility. You're still going to need to know what's up with the issue today. That's going to go a long way toward understanding both sides as well. You're also going to need to provide supporting evidence from both sides, as well as make appeals to try and reach your audience on a logical, emotional, and an ethical level. What we're going to leave behind? Well, you're going to leave behind writing a piece about a position that you previously had. Now, I know many of you guys may not look at these issues and think, hey, I believe there should be a compromise for this. But when it comes to many contentious issues in political spheres and even college spheres, compromise is required because both sides, again, are very entrenched in their beliefs. So maybe this position that you're taking on this essay isn't one you previously had, but it's going to be one that you're going to build toward and you're going to legitimize through doing your research. You're going to leave behind a tone that suggests a previously held position. A big part of doing Rogerian argument is making sure you have an objective, accurate, and fair tone. So that needs to be reflected in your diction or word choice, in syntax, or how you arrange the words into an effective sentence. We're going to learn a lot more about proper tone and style for this later. And also evidence from one perspective. It's going to be really important to bring in evidence from both sides. Remember, there are 4 outside sources required for this essay, so it's going to be important that you bring in equal amounts of evidence from both of the sides. So now we come to the end of this, and we want to ask ourselves, okay, why are we doing this? Why do we have to write about compromising when I already have this made-up opinion about this issue? Well, compromising, occurs more than just in politics and in college business, but it occurs in interpersonal relationships. So let's see how it applies to real life. The reason we're doing this is so you can be able to objectively, accurately, and fairly assess the rationale behind differing sides of an issue. If you ever find yourself mediating a conflict, it's going to be important that you try to empathize or understand with both sides. So in order to do that, you have to learn to be objective, accurate, and fair whenever you're analyzing the perspectives from differing sides of an issue. To be able to identify common ground between those sides. Sure, understanding rationale is great, but it doesn't really help if you can't do something about it, if you can't propose a compromise. So compromises are always built on that common ground between both of those sides. Building off of the top point, by being able to understand the rationale behind both sides, you can more easily identify a common ground that they might share. To be able to use creative problem solving to propose a compromise. So when we do a compromise, it's not readily there. The solution doesn't exist yet. So we have to be creative. We have to come up with it through analysis, through analyzing both sides, through identifying a common ground, and building a compromise atop that common ground. So much like the last two, this applies outside of college, outside of politics, the usual places, to things like interpersonal relationships, and many things like that. To be able to exercise a give and take on points of contention. Yes, with compromise, different sides are going to want different things to be included in the compromise. So you're going to have to exercise a give and take between both of those sides. Many times, pure right in the middle compromises can never really be reached. So you're going to have to kind of see what other sides are willing to give and take. Again, this is something that's relevant not just in college and in the political sphere, but in solving problems whose solutions aren't readily apparent, many different things like that. To be able to consider areas of mutual benefit. When making a decision that's going to affect a lot of people, obviously mutual benefit is going to be something that's really important to consider. This is something that reflects beyond even the interpersonal thing. It's, the business world. When making decisions, if you're in some sort of management position or position of power, you're going to want to look for the mutual benefit. Now, many people may have different ideas of what mutual benefit is. So that's where all these other ideas come in. Finding common ground, understanding the rationale behind both sides, exercising give and take. The tools you get from Rogerian argument will certainly help. And last, to be able to recognize and understand implicit bias. We're going to come across a lot of different evidence from both sides that's going to be biased. When it comes to controversial issues, many times different sides will sway and write evidence a certain way to give it a certain effect and make it more enticing. However, we're going to have to sharpen our research tools here, and we're going to have to be able to recognize and understand and find implicit bias when we see it. So if you're still thinking about what you want to write, here are 4 questions you might ask yourself. First, what is a prominent topic of debate in designing educational curriculum? What makes it controversial? Let's think about e-curriculum versus in-class learning. Now, many people have varying opinions whether they think online learning is most effective or in-class learning is most effective. Many of those times, those opinions are really experience-driven and can be real emotionally driven. So, when thinking about what issue you want to write about, are people's ideas, are the main sides often emotionally driven? Second, what issue presents a problem with a significant need for solution? The example I give here are literacy rates. Obviously, literacy, the ability to read and write, is a very important tool, not just for higher education, but just getting through middle and high school and everyday life. So obviously, literacy is something that's more relevant outside of school. So that has a much more significant need for solution than the above topic. Third, what issue do people often take sides on an emotional basis? Again, emotional basis is kind of the epicenter of what makes an issue controversial. Let's think about the example here, funding versus arts versus STEM programs. Whatever your interests are in college, whether they be something that maybe is in more of the arts or humanities directions or more of the STEM direction, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, your interests aren't necessarily based in some sort of cold, reasoned out logic. They're based upon what you feel is right and what you like. So oftentimes whenever people debate upon funding, between these two programs, they'll take sides on this emotional basis. Last, what potential solution could be the most mutually beneficial to all? So when you have maybe 2 or 3 topics you're looking for, look through these. A compromise on which of those issues would be most mutually beneficial. If we take a look at these 3, it would most likely be literacy rates. Obviously, if more people are literate, we can assume that our educational system and our student body is a little bit stronger. However, again, it's up to you to pick out what you're interested in and what you'd like to write about. All right, guys, that's about it. Again, if you have any questions, please email me at rran0001@kctcs.edu. Thank you.